My friends, tensions are rising between the United States and Iran. The latest event of this US intervention in the Middle East took place on January 28th, when a drone launched by Iranian-backed militias has left 3 Americans KIA and another 47 wounded. This attack was carried out by a new group called the Islamic Resistance in Iraq, which supposedly targeted a secret military base known as Tower 22 in Jordan. At this rate, the US could be dragged into a larger regional war against local Iranian-backed proxies. Here from the Financial Times, the axis of resistance, pushing US to ramp up Middle East defenses. As you can see on this map behind me, the latest drone attack is part of a larger military campaign to evict the US military from Iraq and Syria. Since mid-October, there have been 160 attacks against US military installations. With that being said, that's also when everyone wondered,
what are you doing here?
I mean, did you know that the US still has a staggering 45,000 military personnel deployed in the Middle East, of which 900 are in Syria and another 2,500 in Iraq. Officially. Because in this article, AP reveals that on any given day, there are at least 900 US forces in Syria, along with an undisclosed number of contractors, meaning the real number of Americans in both these countries could be double that number. And at this point, once again, you might ask yourself, why are the United States still deploying troops in roughly 13 military bases across Syria and Iraq, when supposedly their mission had been completed years ago?
What are you doing?
Me? Just hanging around.
Another part of this drama is that some people claim the attack did not actually target Tower 22 in Jordan, but rather against the neighboring US military base in Al-Tanf, located in Syria. Not a wild guess, considering Al-Tanf was already targeted on the 24th of October and the 12th of November of the previous year. Also, the excuses by the US military were rather strange. The fact that most of the personnel at Tower 22 were engineers or airmen could indicate that the base has significant air defense capabilities. Now, how come it failed to stop the attack? Apparently, the Iranian-made drone was confused for a friendly drone. I don't know. And what were these US drones doing roaming over the sky of Syria anyway? In response, many people started questioning the purpose of the American presence in Syria and Iraq. Here from the BBC, what is Tower 22 and why are US troops in Jordan? In this article, Forbes wrote, "Is this the beginning of the end for US troop deployments in Syria and Iraq?" Not only that, but in recent months, and again in January, literally days ago, Iraq's Prime Minister al-Sudani has repeatedly called for a complete US withdrawal from Iraq. There are also major reasons why US forces do not want to abandon the region. We'll talk more about it, but long story short, these military bases hold extremely geostrategic positions. Meanwhile, Iran's foreign ministry denied responsibility for the attack in Jordan, and that these groups acted independently. Now, because of the loss of life of US military personnel, many high-profile American politicians want retaliation, revenge strikes. Hit Iran now, hit him hard. Target Tehran. We cannot appear weak. Do it. And as of this recording, the Biden administration is considering a new round of airstrikes against Iranian assets in Iraq and Syria. And according to the latest news, this is exactly what happened. President Biden ordered 85 airstrikes on Iran-backed targets all across the region. I mean, it's the same response they've been doing for years. Is it gonna work this time? Let's ask the top dog himself.
Are the airstrikes in Yemen working?
Well, when you say working, are they stopping the Houthis? No. Are they going to continue? Yes.
Welcome to History Legends, and here are the latest news of the US-Iranian proxy war. If you're new to this channel, make sure to like and subscribe. As you know, some of my videos have been targeted with limited or no ads. So make sure to check out my Patreon or PayPal. Thank you. to everyone that has already helped, and welcome to the headquarters. So, what is the context of this crisis? The latest drone strike on this US base is just part of a very long insurgency campaign by Iran to kick out the American military from the region. As I've told you earlier, over 160 attacks have been carried out by Iranian-backed militias against US installations in the region. Iran uses its local proxies to fire rockets and drones to harass and bombard US military personnel. What makes this crisis difficult to handle for the United States is that they might have a watch, but Iran has time. For example, on the 27th of December 2019, a rocket attack hit the K1 military base in Iraq, which housed US and Iraqi forces. One US contractor was KIA, and it wounded 4 US and 2 Iraqi service members. A couple days later, on the 31st, Iranian-backed militias stormed the US embassy in Baghdad. This was followed by US retaliatory airstrikes. American fighter aircraft released their loads on MRLS systems, ammo dumps, safe houses, and training camps that we can believe to be integrated inside residential sectors. Although the US claims it's carrying surgical strikes, collateral damage is unavoidable. Each and every one of these bombardments will anger the local civilian population that will demand their local authorities to take action. This US air campaign culminated with the strike on Iranian General Qasem Soleimani on the 3rd of January 2020. Did it solve anything? Well, 5 days later, 12 ballistic missiles were fired at the US-controlled Al-Assad air base, causing 110 US military personnel to be wounded. March 2020, 29 rockets fell on Camp Taji north of Baghdad. The attack caused 22 casualties, of which 2 US and 1 British soldiers KIA. This was followed by, you guessed it, more retaliatory airstrikes. The COV event slowed things down, but US forces in Erbil still got targeted by rockets, once in February 2021 and again in March 2022. The United States lost 1 contractor KIA and 16 wounded. After a 2-year Kahwa break, March 2023, new attack against a US base in Syria. 1 contractor lost his life and another 6 servicemen were wounded. Most of this US bombardment campaign targeted Iranian assets in Iraq. Meanwhile, during all this time, Israel carried out more than 109 airstrike raids against Iranian-linked military targets in Syria, 35 in 2021, 29 in 2022, 42 in 2023, and 3 in 2024. The latest one took place on the 20th of January in Damascus against an Iranian headquarters. As you can imagine, this proxy war flared up with the fighting in Gaza. As you can see here, the newly created pro-Iranian group Islamic Resistance in Iraq targeted 6 US military facilities in Syria and Iraq using artisanal MRLS systems and drones. On the 23rd of October, more US military bases were targeted. Al-Tanf, Al-Shaddadi, and Al-Omar in Syria were hit by drones. On the 15th of January, ballistic missiles were launched against the US consulate in Erbil, leaving 4 Americans killed and another 17 wounded. 3 days later, the Islamic Resistance of Iraq shot down a US MQ-9 Reaper drone in northeast Iraq. This is when the US had enough. The US military command in the Middle East ordered new airstrikes against pro-Iranian militias in Al-Qaim and Jurf al-Sahar. In this article from the BBC on the 24th of January, Iraq condemns irresponsible US airstrikes on Iran-backed groups. Now, this is awkward. And while the US was rethinking its strategy, this is when a drone targeted US forces at the Jordanian border. So where exactly did this attack take place? Officially, the base that was targeted was Tower 22. This US installation that sits in the Jordanian desert is home to 350 military personnel. Now, it's positioned 1 kilometer from the Syrian border and 10 kilometers away from the Iraqi one. As you can imagine, this location is extremely strategic. But what's weird is that on Google Maps, we can zoom in and see the entire structure of this base. However, some experts believe that the real attack took place against Al-Tanf, another US base 20 kilometers to the north of Tower 22. But this one is inside Syria. Essentially, their claim is that the US wanted to blur the lines of its military presence in Syria to the public, and did not want people asking more questions such as,
What are you doing here?
and if we go on Google Maps, Al-Tanf is empty. It's literally desert. When we know that as of October 2023, the US greatly expanded the base. I mean, at this point, it has an outer wall, trenches. It's literally a castle. They should make a movie about this place and call it Sand Castle. What do you mean it's already taken? The Al-Tanf garrison houses between 100 and 200 US troops. Because of its secrecy, we can assume that most of them are special operatives. And that's where you might ask yourself, what are US soldiers doing there in the first place? Oh well, oh well, oh well. After withdrawing from Iraq in 2011,
These are the last vehicles of the U.S. convoy out of Iraq.
and waving everyone goodbye, US troops returned in 2014, this time to fight a new threat called the IS state.
Oh shit, here we go again.
Now, jokes aside, IS insurgents were not only spreading across Iraq but also throughout Syria, where they greatly expanded their holdings.
Last night, on my orders, America's armed forces began strikes against ISIL targets in Syria.
What started as simple no-strings-attached airstrikes naturally evolved into something deeper.
I've decided to increase U.S. support for local forces fighting ISIL in Syria. A small number of American Special Operations Forces are already on the ground in Syria, and their expertise has been critical as local forces have driven ISIL out of key areas.
The local partner of US Special Forces in Syria was the SDF, or Syrian Democratic Forces, a coalition of ethnic Kurdish militias fighting IS insurgents, the army of Bashar al-Assad, and Turkish forces. And the US decided to put themselves right in the middle. In March 2016, US-trained Syrian rebels captured the Al-Tanf border checkpoint from IS militants. The BBC reported the presence of British special operatives at Al-Tanf, quickly followed by US Special Forces.
But what we see next takes us completely by surprise. Western Special Forces units are known to be operating in the area, but prefer to keep a very low profile.
That's where we have to talk about the duality of the American mission. Train Syrian rebels against the government army and fight off IS militants. The campaign against IS took years, but with the support of Iraqi security forces and Kurdish militias both from Syria and Iraq. By 2019, the US declared the forces of the Caliphate as destroyed. Time to pack up and go home. And that's how in October 2019, the New York Times spoke about the departure of US troops from Syria. Not so fast. That was all a scam and the US did not really leave. Also, the majority of these US bases are all located near Syria's eastern oil fields. I mean, it's just a coincidence, right? The US command decided to maintain their presence in the region because officially remnants of the IS group were still roaming around. And that's how even a couple months after their supposed departure, US soldiers were still patrolling in Syria's Kurdish north. In reality, the objective of their mission had simply shifted. First, it was to stop the expansion of Russian influence in the region. For example, in this video from June 2020, you can see a US column of armored vehicles blocking the path of a Russian patrol near the city of Derik in northeast Syria. Not only did the Americans want to keep a close eye on the Russians, but they also wanted to keep in check the Turkish military that was now taking more and more ground in Syria. By the way, I made an entire video about it. If you're interested, the link will be in the description below. And that's how by 2021, the US mission officially remained the same.
We support the SDF in their security operations to counter Daesh, to counter ISIS, and that's really hasn't been a change to our mission to this point.
That's how in Iraq, the US maintained 2,500 troops in Erbil and Al-Assad air bases, as well as in the Union 3 base in Baghdad, plus another 900 spread across Syria. I mean, even by late March 2023, the official reason for the US military presence in Syria was to advise and assist the SDF.
Right.
So as a summary, the reason why the Americans stayed in the region is 1. To stop the Russians, 2. To stop Turkey, and 3. To stop Iran. That's how the US garrison of Al-Tanf became the rock in the Iranian boot, to the point that over the years this simple border checkpoint turned into an outpost, soon got upgraded to a bastion, and eventually to an all-out fortress. This sentinel in the desert was located right on the path of the vital road linking Tehran, Baghdad to Damascus, all the way to southern Lebanon. This insignificant US garrison pretty much disrupted all Iranian plans in the region. The only way Tehran could support and supply Damascus was using aircraft, which is very expensive and difficult, considering Israeli airstrikes constantly bombed all the airports in Syria. And talking about that, military.com reveals that Israel regularly strikes Iranian-backed forces in Syria, and flying over Al-Tanf allows Israeli aircraft to limit their exposure to Syrian air defenses, most of which are in western Syria. Sneaky, sneaky.
The axis of resistance. There's a number of pro-Iranian militias based in Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, the Palestinian territories, and as far south as Yemen.
Fast forward a couple years, fighting in Gaza, Hezbollah in the north, Iran's plans for the Middle East can be summarized in 2 points. Number 1, protect Shia minorities. Although Shia Muslims represent a minority in the Muslim world with only 10% of followers, they represent a big part of the Muslims in that region. So when the mainstream media keeps talking about Iran-backed groups, HZB in South Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, the PMU and Islamic resistance in Iraq, the reason Iran supports all of these groups is simple. They're all Shia Muslims, just like the state religion of Iran. Essentially, it's an ethno-religious alliance with Iran at its head. Number 2, create a corridor to the Mediterranean, with HZB strongly anchored in South Lebanon, with Bashar al-Assad in Syria, both of which have strong ties to Iran. In order to create this corridor, the missing link is Iraq. In other words, Iran wants American forces out of the country ASAP. Long story short, after the US occupation of Iraq, they started implementing democratic elections. Thing is, the Shia are not a minority like in the rest of the Muslim world, but actually represent 60% of the Iraqi population. And because of that, Iran has a lot of influence in the country. Naturally, because of the demographic weight of the Shia population, they win every election. And it's not a surprise that the current Iraqi Prime Minister al-Sudani is also a Shia Muslim. And that's how Iran is moving its pawns on this geopolitical chessboard. US-Iraq begin formal talks on winding down US-led military coalition, which is a euphemism because they're actually talking about a complete US withdrawal from Iraq. If that withdrawal indeed happens, the next logical step for Iran would be to get US forces to evacuate their bases in Syria. Not even all their bases, but really Al-Tanf. Perhaps even the one of Tower 22. That's all I have for you today. Let me know in the comment section what you thought of my analysis. If you're new to this channel, make sure to like and subscribe. And if you want to support my work, make sure to check out my PayPal or Patreon. The links are in the description below.